Well, I can begin. My area of expertise, or the area that I've been working in for a number of years now, is falls under the umbrella of human resources. If anyone's familiar with that area, there are a number of fields within human resources, and for me, my focus has always been in training and development. And certainly, having a background in creativity and creative problem solving has been absolutely critical in that area. One of the things, and I made a note to write it down because I wanted to remember it, is the task analysis piece. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, I work with many organizations. Every single day, I work with a different organization. Some of them are for-profit, some are non-for-profit, some are government agencies, and across industry lines. So I've worked within manufacturing, healthcare, retailing, financial services, you name it, we've pretty much done it. And so the task analysis piece is just, I think, critical to really help you clarify what's happening. Because a lot of times people think they know what the problem is when they call you in, and they usually call you in when their back is up against the wall. But when they call you in, they think they know what the issue is, but until you really take them through a task analysis, they don't know. I would have to say that probably 75–80% of the time, they really don't have a complete picture, global picture of what's happening and what they really need. So that's a critical piece. The other thing, too, I think within training and development is that in my position, I'm juggling a lot of schedules, whether it's organizational schedules, whether it's trainer schedules, and there are always problems that come up. So of course, being able to just kind of sit back and say, okay, now this problem has happened how many times? Let's make sure that we really fix this. And CPS really comes in very handy with my team. I tend to involve everybody, in the process. So that's extremely important. The other thing, too, is that I stress with my clients the value and the critical need for creative problem-solving skills for their people, not just their leadership, but also first-line supervision and staff. And we've been fortunate. Sue has helped me on some occasions, and other members of the faculty have helped as well, where we were able to go in and deliver creative problem-solving training to either upper-level leadership, first-line supervision, and just recently we were able to deliver it to the entire staff within an organization, and that just can be so very powerful. So that's how I've used it, and I'm sure there are lots of other ways that I'm just not thinking of right this second. As far as the easiest and the hardest aspects of the journey, I would have to say it's been very easy to stay enthusiastic and stay very positive and stay very interested in the whole field of creativity and creative problem solving. What's been more difficult, I think, is to be able to kind of go out into the outside world and help people to really understand what creativity is all about. It's not standing barefoot, finger painting, it's something extremely critical. It's a life skill, if you think about it. To me, it's a core skill, like reading, writing, math. But I think we still have some, ways to go to really get people to understand that. So I would have to say that my work in trying to, I guess, quote-unquote, mainstream that creativity in CPS, it has taken a lot longer than I thought. But I think together we can really make some inroads. So.
One of the things that we have students do is we'll ask them, if you're going out and you're going to pitch it,
yeah,
what are some things you would say?
Yeah,
do you have some
speech.
Some things that you say to?
Well, to be perfectly honest, I don't usually use the word creativity until I've already kind of broken them in to the whole concept. I use the word innovation. And we talk about making people more productive, impacting morale and retention. You have to understand, I work in an organizational setting, and so I have to give them reasons to bring us in and give them reasons to have the training deliver, because they're paying wages when folks are sitting in this, and it could run in the tens of thousands of dollars for them on top of what they pay us to deliver the training. So if you look at it from their perspective, you have to make it very clear. You have to speak in their language, whatever their language happens to be, and then you have to try to figure out what's in it for them. And that usually works, but just using the term innovation, and innovation, as far as I'm concerned, I always couple innovation with continuous improvement. That's what you do. Whether you're out on a manufacturing shop floor, or you're in a hospital and you're trying to, manage an emergency room. It really doesn't matter what you're doing. We all know that the process can be overlaid on just about anything, at all. But it's very, very important that folks understand that this innovation thing is not warm and fuzzy. It's very hard. It's very beneficial. They'll see it on the bottom line. And so I usually do couple the term innovation, continuous improvement, productivity, and so forth. And that seems to work. That catches them. Once I've got them, then we can talk about creativity. And, and that works.
Yeah, it was really interesting to work with you and actually co-create it with the clients.
Yes.
And really make it fit their culture.
Yes.
To the best degree we could.
Yes. Well, and that's what I do. That's what we do, and that's really what I demand of my staff. We customize everything because you have to. Even if you're looking at two manufacturers, you look at, let's say, GM and Chrysler. Well, they all, manufacture cars, but they're all very different. Their cultures are different. That's a consideration. What is the culture? So how do we approach this? And you may work with both clients and introduce creative problem solving to both clients, but you'll do it in very distinctly different ways. So it's very important that you keep that in mind. There really isn't a cookie cutter, off the shelf, way to do it. The process is the process is the process. And Sue and I have talked a lot about just trust the process, it's going to work. And it does. It does. But within that process, you really have to be very sensitive to the needs of your client, or maybe it's your own organization, the place where you work. But it's very important to remember.
Okay. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
I can take it away from there.
Karen, great.
I think my focus and what I feel I took away mostly from the program and into my professional life is more focus on the myself as a creative person. And I think going into the teaching graduate students, and these are teachers that are out there wanting to bring out that creativity in their students, my focus has been on helping them understand themselves as a creative person. And it's amazing to me. Actually, a wonderful part of being the director of the program is I get to create an elective if I want to. And of course, when I had that chance, it was, well, you know what it's going to be. It's DI and how it relates to creativity. And it's just an amazing experience to be teaching something that you're so passionate about. And I do feel like that creativity is a passion of mine, as I know it is probably everybody in here. It's just kind of finding what that niche is for you. And I feel like this is a real niche. So the first class I had with my graduate students 2 weeks ago, it was just amazing to me how so many of them still will say, I don't have a creative bone in my body. And it just, and having gone through the program, you kind of get that out of your system pretty much early on, because you kind of learn otherwise that that's not the case. But it's so important for me to instill in them that each of them has a gift and has these talents, these creative nature that needs to come out, and for them to nurture that so that they can recognize it and nurture it in their students. It's hard to teach creativity when you don't realize that you are creative yourself. So that's kind of been my push and my little, my feather in my cap when I go out and teach these students. And I feel very blessed to be able to do that. As I was saying, I think creativity and differentiated instruction, it's just a perfect match. I don't think you can successfully differentiate in a classroom without having a knowledge of creativity and, the 4 areas that we all know so well as the 4 Ps. So I think in order to, move beyond what we know and coming out of this program and to be able to find that niche is to really understand it in ourselves and really take the time to figure out what it is that we have to offer so that we can instill it in our students and in our colleagues and in our family members, the people around us. As far as the things that were hardest and easiest, the hardest came to my mind first, I think, going through the program, even though it was literally life-changing for me. It sort of came a time in my life where I needed that change, but it was a drastic change, and everything seemed to sort of go upside down. I took a leave of absence to finish my master's, and I had just had a baby, and everything was crazy. But it was really a turning point in my life, and it makes me think of Robert Fritz and the whole, the gap, the fuzzy part, before you get to that desired state. And I truly believe that, you need to have that vision. You need to be able to see where you want to be. And that makes that fuzziness a little bit more, that you can handle it a little bit better. It's frustrating, and it's that chaos, it's that gap that you feel intensely, and it's a physical thing. But I think the joy comes in the abundance that comes out of that. We're not growing, we're not changing, we're not doing anything positively, changing positively, unless we go through that. So I guess it's learning how to, just deal with it a little bit, because the good stuff's going to come at the end.
Can I add something?
Please.
Kara brings up a really good point, and I think it's something that I remember being a student going through the program, and then after graduation, just kind of happened to start a business. I don't know how that happened, but anyway, you tend to think that, okay, so now I've learned this, and you try to very rigidly overlay that on everything and everybody, and you don't really find yourself, which I think is where you were going, Kara. And it's very important that you give yourself the opportunity to become who you are with the process and find your niche, because we're all different. If we all went off, into the next room and each facilitated a group, we would do it very differently. We'd follow the same process, but our styles are different. Personalities are different, expectations, and so forth. And I just think, I'm sorry to interrupt.
No.
I just think that's a very important piece. And for me, it took a while, because I kept thinking, well, I have to be like Roger. I have to be like Sue. I have to be like Gerard. Well, they're all wonderful. But
nobody wants to be like us.
Yeah, nobody wants to be like us. But you have to find your niche and your way of, delivering the message and working the process. So thank you for bringing that up.
Absolutely, and that's such a good point, because we leave the program feeling, I felt this sense of loss when I had to graduate,
Yeah.
As much as I wanted to get out there. It's like, oh my God, what am I going to do now? And then the obvious would be to become, I love to facilitate because it's so much fun. So let's be Roger. And so I connected with Roger. And
I did too.
Yeah, and I thought this is it. This is what this is my niche. And I started my own consulting business, and and I still am consulting on the side, but that's really what it had to be on the side, because no money was coming. And what I realized soon, it wasn't about the money. It was about, I'm not a business-minded person, nor do I really want to be. And so, what you see all finished and perfect, he's been honing that for years and years, as have, the faculty. But in the process, I just realized that wasn't me. I didn't like to have to sell myself. I didn't like to have to worry about where the next paycheck was going to come. And, not to say that it wouldn't have eventually, but I didn't have time to invest in that and money at that point. But it's interesting, because once I actually said it out loud and I said, this isn't for me. This isn't the path I need to go. It's not a failure, because, wow, I started my own business. How cool is that? I can say that I did that, and, and it was a phone call to Sue, and I just said, all right, I think this isn't for me, but, you know, maybe I need to start teaching again, because it's my, you know, that's my love as well. And it just sort of connected, and this other thing happened about. But I think I had to understand that about myself,
Yes.
and I had to close that door, you know, proverbial, the window will open, you know, but you have to trust yourself. Yeah, absolutely.
As well as the process, right?
As well as trust.
I wrote that too. Trust the process. I mean, it's a big thing of trusting the process. But I think where I came from, I was a teacher when I entered the master's program, and I already knew certain things about myself. I knew that I was a teacher who wanted to teach kids to be better thinkers. And I might teach them math and social studies and science. I was a second grade teacher. But the math and social studies and science is what they were thinking about. I wanted them to be good thinkers. And that's how I got into the program. I ended up talking to Scott and Roger and a couple of other people that this is the program for me because this is really what it's all about. And then I ended up getting into gifted education. But it's all about helping kids become self-directed learners, helping kids think at a higher level, and that whole idea that it's not about, they're not just born being able to think. They can think, but how do we use it?
Yes,
and it was actually Michael Curtin. We were in we having dinner one time, and Michael Curtin joined us, and he told the story that I'll never forget. And he said, if you're walking at night and you think someone's behind you or you think something's behind you, would you turn around and stare where you think the person might be, or would you look from side to side? And I didn't know. I'd probably turn around and stare. He said, no, actually your night vision is better if you look from side to side. So he said, you already had that ability, but you didn't know that about your ability. And that was the good analogy for, that's what we can do as teachers, is we can teach kids and graduate students and other adults how to use the thinking that they have. And like you're saying with creativity, we all have creativity, but to what level? And a lot of teachers, I do a lot of training with differentiated instruction and teacher centers all over. And creativity is the biggest piece that people don't have. We talk about differentiating, we talk about teaching higher level thinking. We can teach knowledge. We can teach them learning to learn skills. How do you remember? How do you control your attention? How do you control your attitude? Those kind of things for knowledge. And we can teach them about critical thinking. But when it gets to the creative thinking, that's when teachers don't have strategies. They don't know what to do with kids who are creative in their classroom. Kids who have a creative preference, they don't know what to do because they don't feel comfortable with it. But to give them a few skills, no matter what I'm teaching, I always throw in those creativity skills. And it's not the process. I'm not teaching the process. I'm teaching them, well, try scamper. Or try, brainstorming, what are the rules for that and why does it work and what does, it mean to defer judgment and those kind of things. So I think that no matter what I'm doing, whether someone's asking me to teach differentiated instruction or multiple intelligences or what is it now? I don't know, if it's data, team, formative assessment, I don't know. It just keeps changing what it is they want me to teach. No matter what I'm teaching, I always throw in the learning to learn and creative skills, because that's the part that the teachers come back and say, that was most valuable to me. I still use it. Or they'll see me years and years later and say, I still use this or I still use that. And it's these creative thinking skills and all of the techniques that help people become the creative person that they are. That's what really makes the difference. So that's how I use it in my everyday teaching, with no matter what I'm doing. I think the hardest part for me was actually, like you were saying, going through the program. It was a long time ago for me, and I had both of my babies at the time when I was going through my master's program. So I had 2 infants, working full time, but I did it, and you get through. It feels good when you're done, but you get so much knowledge, and having friends like Sue and Gerard went through the program with us too, and that's what got us through. We worked together, we collaborated with each other, and it was a great journey, but it was very difficult to get through especially that project at the end. And you're not going to give up. You persevere. You just do what you have to do, and you get done, whether you have babies crying at home or not. You just have to do
On
it.
your lap.
That's right. You just do it.
And I think the biggest challenge right now is when I first graduated, creativity was coming up and coming, and we were getting it in schools, and it was great. And then along came NCLB. And all of a sudden, teachers thought they needed to teach for the test. And so I don't have time for that creativity fluff stuff anymore. And so that's the biggest challenge now, is to get them, now they're more and more accountable for those tests, to get them to see that if you teach for creative thinking, and if you teach for critical thinking, and if you teach up here, they're going to do better on the tests. Mm-hmm. But if you teach directly to the test, they're not teaching them how to think better, they're just teaching them, I don't know, are you memorizing more stuff so that you can take this test? So I think that's our biggest challenge in education, is to convince everyone that if we teach up here, the kids will do well on the test, because it's about logical thinking and all of those things. And we can teach them, those creative kids that say, well, it could be this, it could be this, it could be this. We'll teach them how to, don't use your creative thinking when you're taking a multiple choice test.
Right.
Right. Use your creative thinking for this, but not this, and this is when you need it.
Right.
And we can teach them that. So I think that's our biggest challenge.
Well, one thing that comes to my mind is, and probably because I work so much with the workforce in general, one of the biggest challenges, one of the biggest disconnects that I keep hearing from employers is the whole idea that folks that are trying to enter the workplace, whether they're right from high school or, they're coming from another job, or just in general, that they don't have some of the basic skills. And some of those basic skills are thinking skills. And right now when we look at it, we are in a global economy. This is not, I'm not competing with Kara right next to me. I'm competing with, someone in China or, Greece or
India.
wherever. Exactly. And so those aren't there. So I think, to Nancy's point, we're doing them a disservice by not teaching those, in the classroom. Those are so valuable and just critical once they get into the workplace. So I don't know how you do it, but there is that disconnect.
Well, I think we have the how-to of it, but it's convincing everyone of the necessity of it, and of them letting go of, I've got to get my students ready for this Regents test. Yes, you do, but
It's not an either or,
Yeah.
and that's what they think
Right.
sometimes.
Yeah.
Right, and maybe it's that satisfying this immediate need versus looking at it globally. What do these students need as I prepare them for either higher education or the workplace? Because let's face it, eventually you get out of school and you got to go to work, and so these are very, very important.
Seems very typical of the Western thinking too. I mean, with the continuous improvement, just reminds me of the the Eastern philosophies
Yes.
of just in the workplace, and is it Kaizen? Is that
Yes,
continuous
we have
improvement?
Kaizen events.
And I think we're just trained to think, like the big idea, the big bang, the big, we need it now, we need it yesterday,
Right.
and there's no, patience for, well, if we do it this way, there's going to be long-term, improvement.
Well, and I can't tell you how many organizations come in and want us to train their people on problem solving. They may not accept the creative problem solving, but they really need their folks to be able to come to a solution. They need for them to recognize a problem and then, get to a solution. And certainly that CPS is the best way to do it. But when we deliver continuous improvement, you mentioned Kaizen, that's part of Lean training. I don't know if anyone's heard of Lean and Six Sigma, okay? It's part of that training. And we have to start at the very beginning. I can't remember which of the ladies talked about that, but people aren't necessarily born with good problem-solving skills. Like, they're not born with great thinking skills or great listening skills or what have you. So we really, when we do that, we go into organizations, we're forced to start at the very beginning because they don't have those skills.